Ձեռք բերեք իտալական նրբագեղ ու բարձրակարգ սալիկների նշված տեսականին, վճարելով բացառիկ 4400 դրամ 1 քառակուսի մետրի համար.
He has authored several policy papers for the government of Armenia and serves as an advisor to numerous state institutions there. And finally, we have Dr. Jennifer Wistrand, who until recently was the deputy director of the Kennan Institute. She holds an MA and PhD in anthropology from Washington University in St. Louis. Her areas of expertise are migration and forced displacement in the Caucasus and Central Asia, and development approaches to managing migration and forced displacement. Prior to that, she was a consultant to the World Bank for projects concerning internally displaced persons in, among other countries, Azerbaijan. She has held a number of fellowships, including a Fulbright Fellowship in Azerbaijan. So as you can see, it's a diverse group, government, non-government, and I think we will just kick this off with a statement from Ms. Karapetyan. Please.
Thank you, Bhakti. Does this work?
Yes.
Microphones? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I am here together with fellow parliamentarians on an annual trip of the Armenia-US Parliamentary Friendship Group that we have in the Parliament of the Republic of Armenia to engage with colleagues in the US Congress on two topics this year: the Charter on Strategic Partnership between the United States and Armenia, and the current state of the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I would like to express my appreciation for the US Helsinki Commission for this opportunity, and I'm thankful to all of you who were able to come here this afternoon, and also my fellow panelists for the exchange that we are about to have. Armenia and Azerbaijan are at a defining moment in their modern history. This March, our two countries concluded negotiations on the Agreement on Peace and Establishment of Interstate Relations. Both Armenia and Azerbaijan have confirmed that the text of the peace treaty is ready. Armenia has also expressed readiness to sign the peace agreement immediately. Azerbaijan believes two things need to happen before the signing of the peace agreement. Number one, Armenia and Azerbaijan need to apply to the OSCE to request the dissolution of the mechanisms that were created to address the conflict in our region. Number two, Azerbaijan believes that Armenia needs to make constitutional changes to address what is perceived as territorial claims towards Azerbaijan. Armenia shares the position that the OSCE mechanisms that were created to address the conflict need to be dissolved. Hence, we suggest taking these two actions on the same day, signing the peace agreement and jointly applying to the OSCE. We believe that the signing of the peace agreement needs to accompany this joint application to the OSCE to ensure that a signed peace agreement will immediately and permanently take the place of the already obsolete conflict mechanisms. Or, in other words, we need to make sure that we have not closed one conflict only to open a new one, albeit reframing the problem. So ultimately, a signed peace agreement is needed to institutionalize peace in our region. Regarding the second concern that Azerbaijan raises about the constitution of Armenia, we are convinced that the signing of the peace agreement is the best and shortest way to address those concerns as well. Why? The constitutional preambles of our two republics are very similar. They both contain references to historical documents. Each of them references the corresponding act of independence. Given the history of conflict and mistrust, and by a big stretch of imagination, yes, we can say these references might perhaps raise concerns. Last year, however, the Constitutional Court of Armenia, the institution that is entitled to interpret our constitution, discussed the matter and produced a decision that our constitution, including the preamble, does not contain any territorial claims to any of our neighbors. So, while we examine and treat the concerns of our neighbor with respect, we are certain that the signing of the peace agreement is the ultimate answer. We are at a critical moment when we need to seal our achievement of jointly agreeing on the text of the peace agreement that can serve as the basis for starting a new relationship between Armenia and Azerbaijan and for the South Caucasus as a whole. And indeed, there is so much more that can flow out of this act of cementing peace between our two republics. The South Caucasus lies between the Black Sea and Turkey to the west, and the Caspian Sea to the east, which means it is one of the regions that links Europe with Central Asia. Our region has so much untapped potential for new pipelines, rails, and other infrastructure that can connect East and West. We can turn the South Caucasus into a crossroads of peace for trade in goods and energy. Simplified transit under the sovereignty of each country is our vision for deblocking the communications in our region and integrating the South Caucasus into the Middle Corridor. We call this moment historic, critical, defining, also because we see opportunity for Armenia and Azerbaijan to make a strategic deal for all future generations to come and to move away from past antagonism and become two neighbors that are permanently at peace with each other, reinforcing each other's stance in the region as transit hubs and serving the national interest of independence and sovereignty of our two republics. In these introductory remarks, I have tried to concentrate on the big picture, and I will be happy to elaborate on the above, as well as anything else we all have in mind during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Karapetyan. Garo, please.
Thank you, Bhakti. Good afternoon. Distinguished members of the Commission, thank you for this opportunity to testify today. I'm currently a visiting scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and previously served as a member of the Turkish Parliament. These are challenging times. The United States is navigating multiple global crises, supporting Ukraine against Russian aggression, and managing the ongoing instability in the Middle East. Amid this turbulence, the South Caucasus presents a unique opportunity to advance US interests by helping broker a durable peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan at a relatively modest diplomatic cost. This is once-in-a-generation opportunity for American leadership as it competes with Russia and China to reshape the future of this strategically vital region, situated at the crossroads of Eurasia's energy and trade routes. Historically, the South Caucasus has been dominated by Russia. Armenia and Azerbaijan have endured decades of conflict since the collapse of the Soviet Union, with Russia exploiting tensions to maintain its influence, its regional influence and military presence. Today, however, the era of Russian dominating is nearing its end. As Armenia and Azerbaijan seek greater autonomy from Moscow, decisive American engagement will be critical to their success. Following two devastating wars since the 1990s and the mass displacement and ethnic cleansing of Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh in 2023, Armenia and Azerbaijan have taken bold steps, agreeing on the full text of a peace agreement in March 2025. Yet, President Aliyev of Azerbaijan remains hesitant to finalize the accord, seeking additional concessions and leaving the door for future military escalation. The United States should explicitly make clear that it is time for peace in the South Caucasus, and any further escalation will carry serious consequences. Equally important, the US should clearly demonstrate the tangible benefits both Armenia and Azerbaijan stand to gain from lasting peace. Active diplomatic engagement and meaningful economic collaboration could unlock substantial opportunities for the region, including the establishment of the Middle Corridor, a strategic trade route linking Europe and Central Asia through the South Caucasus. This initiative would foster economic growth, facilitate energy flows, and secure Western access to the critical rare earth resources in the Central Asia, all bypassing Russian influence. Turkey's role is essential. My country, Turkey's role is very essential. Ankara officially supports peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan and recognizes the region's strategic significance. Yet, Turkey has hesitated to exert sufficient pressure on its ally, President Aliyev. Although Prime Minister Pashinyan's recent meeting with Erdogan in Istanbul was historic, establishing formal diplomatic relations, and opening the Turkish-Armenian border remain unresolved. Turkey should open the border and establish formal diplomatic relations with Armenia as soon as possible. The US should actively engage Ankara to pursue comprehensive normalization with Yerevan and encourage President Erdogan to leverage his influence with President Aliyev to secure lasting peace in the South Caucasus. In this context, deepening the US-Armenia strategic partnership is crucial. Enhanced bilateral ties, economic collaboration, and security cooperation with Yerevan will stabilize the region, strengthen democratic governance, and counterbalance pressures from adversarial powers. President Trump is uniquely positioned to personally engage with President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan, urging them to seize this historic moment to achieve peace. Essential elements for lasting peace should include the immediate release of Armenian political prisoners, which the US can facilitate through diplomatic leverage. Allow me to close on a personal note, Mr. Chairman. As an Armenian from Turkey who served in the Turkish parliament for 9 years, I have actively worked and struggled for reconciliation among Armenians, Turks, and Azeris. I deeply understand the devastating costs of the absence of peace in both the recent and more distant past. The region has experienced wars, mass migrations, and atrocities, including ethnic cleansing and genocide. While we cannot undo the tragedies of our ancestors endured, a peaceful and just future remains achievable. The people of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey are ready. Committed US engagement can now make all the difference. Peace is the only path to healing. After ending the cycle of retribution, we must establish mechanisms for reconciliation to heal the wounds of the victims and their families. In a time of global uncertainty and fragmentation, the South Caucasus can become a success story for US diplomacy, a model of reconciliation and shared prosperity. We will never forget the past, but let us not miss this historic opportunity to build a better future. Thank you again for the privilege to testify today, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pailan. Dr. Kapayan, please.
Thank you, Bhakti. Members of the Commission, it's a distinct pleasure to be here. Since the beginning of the U.S. strategic dialogue with Armenia in 2019, bilateral relations between the two countries have deepened. The interest in enhancing this partnership culminated in the Charter of a Strategic Partnership in January of 2025. Armenia, in essence, has become a crucial foothold for American and transatlantic interests in the South Caucasus. In this context, it is in the U.S. interest to secure peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, to deter aggression, and to maintain regional stability. During his swearing-in remarks, Secretary of State Marco Rubio emphasized, quote, "Everything we do must be justified by the answer to one of three questions. Does it make us stronger? Does it make us safer? And does it make us prosperous?" Unquote. To continue strengthening the U.S.-Armenia partnership, in essence, achieves all of these three objectives. More so, a just and sustainable peace in the South Caucasus makes the U.S., as the only actor capable of facilitating such an agreement, stronger, safer, and more prosperous. Specifically in conceptualizing U.S. foreign policy, a dignified and durable peace in the South Caucasus presents four unique opportunities for the U.S. to advance its interests in the region in alignment with that of its partners in the South Caucasus, specifically Armenia. First, there's a unique opening to advance U.S. geostrategic and regional objectives. Second, circumstances to demonstrate the effectiveness and growing strength of U.S. soft power. Third, a non-resource intensive approach to regionally weakening Russia, containing China, and advancing transatlantic interests. And fourth, the simultaneous opportunities to expand U.S. energy, trade, economic ties, and other engagements with its strategic partner in the South Caucasus. Since Azerbaijan's aggression in the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war, the South Caucasus has been reduced to a bastion of instability. Azerbaijan's belligerent actions, bolstered by Russian support for persistent conflict, has led to a complete insecure environment in the region. What we have seen since then is continued Azerbaijani violence, ethnic cleansing, and invasion. Today, Azerbaijan continues to occupy nearly 90 square miles of sovereign Armenian territory. And despite agreement on terms of a peace treaty, Azerbaijan's President Aliyev continues to refuse to sign a peace agreement. Now, in defiance of Russia and to enhance its defense capabilities and to seek greater economic prosperity, Armenia undertook a historical pivot towards the West, specifically deepening and enhancing relations with the United States. We saw that as Russia and Azerbaijan have aligned to minimize Western, especially U.S. influence in the South Caucasus, Armenia has strengthened its defensive partnership with the United States, deepened relations with Western and European partners, frozen its membership in the CSTO, and single-handedly became an anchor for American and transatlantic interests in the region. Considering the precarious regional security environment, with reigning concerns of democratic backsliding in certain countries, we see that it is in the strategic interest of the United States to secure peace, support Armenia's democratic consolidation and resiliency, and not only to contain Russia and Azerbaijan, but also global actors that are seeking to reestablish a regional authoritarian orbit in the South Caucasus, of which Armenia stands as an important obstacle against such a development. We note that Baku's refusal to sign a peace treaty and its continuous engagement in behavior that destabilizes the region directly threatens U.S. interests. So while U.S. and Armenia are strategic partners, we see that Azerbaijan has signed a strategic partnership with China, formed an alliance with Russia, and has sought membership in BRICS. In further contrast, Azerbaijan is an active participant in the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement and an ardent supporter of China's Belt and Road Initiative. We note that Azerbaijan's engagements starkly contradict the underlying pillars of U.S. foreign policy towards Eurasia. In a few short months, we saw the Trump administration demonstrate a willingness to prioritize U.S. resources for efforts that deter war, seek peace, and promote stability. In this context, and in alignment with those visions, the preservation of Armenia's sovereignty and a signing of a peace treaty are of fundamental importance to the United States. It is my understanding that the government of Armenia has and will accept the peace proposals put forth by the United States. Armenia understands and immensely values the work being put forth, the intense work being put forth by the Trump administration in engaging to secure peace in the region. Should Azerbaijan continue to delay or tacitly reject the peace plan proposed by the United States, I recommend 3 bold actions that Congress and the administration must take to send a clear message to Baku, which will deter aggression and impose the conditions for peace. First, the United States must immediately take steps to demonstrate greater bilateral and security relations with Armenia. Legislatively, this includes dedicated foreign military financing, international military education and training, and defense cooperation agencies funding for Armenia. The administration should also support the sale of weapons, including lethal platforms, and sharing of military technology with Armenia to balance the power disparity between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the region. Second, I note that there are numerous opportunities for the U.S. to meaningfully strengthen U.S.-Armenia economic ties. This includes Armenia's desire to make its talented workforce available to the U.S. businesses. In particular, the U.S. government should pursue all opportunities to facilitate significant investment in Armenia's IT, AI, energy, mining, and infrastructure sectors. And third, Congress should support and the administration should impose trigger sanctions against Azerbaijan. To minimize deterrent impact, these sanctions should target Azerbaijan's political and military elite, and if need be, sectoral sanctions against state economic interests. Now, to be clear, trigger sanctions are not designed to serve a punitive purpose, but rather to outline the risks that should Baku continue to engage in hostile actions that are incommensurate with U.S. regional interests, specific responses will be initiated by the United States. Furthermore, trigger sanctions can also serve as a useful tool in addressing Aliyev's long track record of reneging on post-commitments with respect to peace. In conclusion, the United States cannot condone unconstructive behavior by states that believe they can get away with their behavior or act with impunity. Azerbaijan must be convinced there will be consequences for behavior that impedes U.S. interests in the region. Until the Aliyev regime's actions demonstrated genuine commitment to peace and non-aggression, Armenia unequivocally remains the United States' strongest and most constructive partner in achieving peace, stability, and interconnectivity in the region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kapanan. Dr. Wistrand?
Thank you, Bhakti. Dear members of the Commission, thank you for the invitation to appear before you today to discuss matters related to the normalization of relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia. In my opening statement, I will briefly outline some points that I believe are important. I would be happy to go into more detail about these points, as well as other points that are of interest to you during the question and answer session that follows. Before I continue, I'd like to make a brief comment about my affiliation, which Bhakti mentioned. I will no longer have my affiliation after Friday because the executive branch of the United States government decided to dismantle the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, of which the Kennan Institute was a part, by way of an executive order it issued in March and a visit to the Wilson Center by the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, in April. The Wilson Center was established by an act of Congress in 1968 to provide academically informed, nonpartisan analyses of policy-relevant issues, such as that which we are gathered to discuss today. Since Azerbaijan's September 2023 military offensive in Nagorno-Karabakh, which resulted in the de facto government of the breakaway region surrendering to Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan's and Armenia's leaders, President Ilham Aliyev of Azerbaijan and Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan of Armenia, have been seriously discussing the conditions necessary to establish a durable peace between their two states. In March, the two leaders announced that they had finalized the text of a peace agreement. However, they have not yet decided when or where the agreement should be signed. This is likely because there are still some outstanding issues that need to be addressed. Specifically, Azerbaijan would like Armenia to amend its constitution to remove references to its territorial claims over Nagorno-Karabakh. It would also like the OSCE's Minsk group to be formally dissolved. Between 1992 and 2022, representatives from the Minsk group, which was co-chaired by the United States, France, and Russia, regularly met with their Azerbaijani and Armenian counterparts in an effort to mediate the two parties' grievances. The Minsk group's successes, however, were limited. For example, the entity that succeeded in brokering the ceasefire between Azerbaijan and Armenia in November 2020 was not the Minsk group, but Russia. Since 2022, the European Union has attempted to fill the role of the Minsk group. However, its successes, like the Minsk group's, have been limited. It has been suggested that Azerbaijan should accept the tenets of the peace agreement sooner rather than later, i.e., agree to sign the agreement without the above-mentioned conditions having been fully met. Peace agreements require trust, and trust requires respect. Since the conclusion of the 1992-1994 war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which resulted in Armenia taking control of Nagorno-Karabakh and parts of 7 adjacent Azerbaijani regions, which represented around 14% of Azerbaijan's territory, and which produced over 500,000 Azerbaijani internally displaced persons, Azerbaijan has felt humiliated that its land was occupied and its people were displaced, while the international community did little from its perspective to resolve the situation. It is understandable and reasonable for Azerbaijan to want Armenia to amend its constitution to remove references to territorial claims over Nagorno-Karabakh. The United States wants to gain the trust of Azerbaijan. It will respect it by showing support for this condition. At the same time, if the United States wants to gain the trust of Armenia, it will communicate that it hopes the following points are addressed in the peace agreement. 1. Mutual recognition of all territorial boundaries between Azerbaijan and Armenia. 2. Support for Armenians who left Nagorno-Karabakh as refugees following the September 2023 military offensive who would like to integrate into Armenia. 3. Protections for Armenians who would like to return to Nagorno-Karabakh, i.e. cultural rights. 4. Protection of Armenian cultural heritage sites in Nagorno-Karabakh. And 5. Transportation, energy, telecommunication, and other linkages across Nagorno-Karabakh into both Azerbaijan and Armenia. Armenia and Turkey are currently having historic discussions about normalization of relations. If Armenia were to have good relations and open borders with Azerbaijan and Turkey, it would feel less pressure to seek security and other assurances from Russia and Iran. This would be good for Armenia, good for the South Caucasus, and good for the United States. Building on my last point, the South Caucasus countries of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia are in the process of profoundly reevaluating their alliances. Since the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991, Georgia has been staunchly pro-West and anti-Russia. In recent years, however, Georgia's government has been perceived to be increasingly under the influence of Russia. For example, in 2024, the government passed a controversial, quote, foreign agent law, which was modeled after similar legislation Russia passed more than a decade ago, which purports to be used to monitor foreign influence, but which has instead been observed to be used to silence dissent and marginalize, if not outright criminalize, members of minority groups. While Georgia's relations with Russia have warmed in recent years, Armenia's have done the opposite. Historically, Armenia and Russia were closely aligned. The largest Armenian diaspora is in Russia. Armenia was the third most popular destination for Russian nationals fleeing Russia in 2022 and 2023. Russia has a military base in Armenia. Armenia has relied on Russia for military equipment. And until 2024, Armenia and Russia were bound by the Collective Security Treaty Organization, or the CSTO. The CSTO was established in 2002. It's composed of Russia, Belarus, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. Article 4 of the CSTO is similar to Article 5 of NATO, where an attack against one member of the alliance is an attack against all. Following the Russian military's failure to intervene in Azerbaijan's September 2023 military offensive in Nagorno-Karabakh, however, which followed on Russian peacekeepers' failure to intervene in a 9-month Azerbaijani blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia announced a plan to withdraw from the CSTO and seek partnerships elsewhere, which it has done with the European Union and India. While Georgia has been drifting toward Russia and Armenia has been pulling away, Azerbaijan has been strengthening its ties across the wider region and its standing on the international stage. For example, Azerbaijan continues to buy military equipment from and share intelligence with Turkey, as well as Israel. In 2023, President Ilham Aliyev was invited to attend the 5th consultative meeting of the heads of state of Central Asia, the only outside head of state invited to do so. And in 2024, Azerbaijan hosted COP29, the United Nations Climate Change Conference. Conspicuously absent from Azerbaijan's, Armenia's, and Georgia's reconsidered alliances are strengthened ties with the United States. The peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia presents an opportunity for the United States to demonstrate genuine support for both Azerbaijan and Armenia, and in so doing, begin to re-engage in an important region. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Members of the audience, hopefully you saw that we tried to put together a group that is going to give you an all-encompassing and a broad view and different, when I say different, complementary in many ways, views on what is going on with this peace deal and why it's so important. I think the key takeaway is this is a great opportunity for Armenia, for Azerbaijan, for the region, and for the United States. And I think everyone has talked about that. This is an opportunity for a win, for a diplomatic win for the United States, but also for much more tangible things. It's not just a news headline, but rather we're talking about trade, we're talking about energy, we're talking about expanded opportunities in the region for the United States as well. So I think in that sense, this conversation is very important. I'm going to open this up to questions to the members of our audience, but before we do that, I would like to acknowledge Congressman Harris, our commissioner, who's joined us over there. Thank you so much, sir. And I just wanted to ask if you, at any point you want to ask any questions or you have any statements, please do so. But I think I'll try to do a very quick, rapid kind of fire question to all of you, and then anyone in the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to come up. And Jennifer, I'm going to start with you, and it's not maybe contextually. I think it's very important. is the war between Armenia, and you don't have to respond immediately, I think I'm going to ask all these questions and then I'll go back to you. Is the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan a religious war? There's a lot of narratives over the last 3 to 4 months that this is a war between Christians and Muslims and that sort of stuff. And I would like, as an anthropologist and somebody who's been to the region multiple times and who knows the region well, to sort of give a nuance to that and talk about that. Dr. Kapalan, the question to you is, you've talked about interest that United States can have in a region and in Armenia. And one of the things that is obviously in the news right now is the Iran situation. Is there a role for Armenia to play in mediating, maybe some sort of a mediating role between the United States and Iran? And is there some opportunities there for Armenia right now? Mr. Pailan, the question for you is, what's the sequence of normalization process between Turkey and Armenia? Sometimes it seems like everybody's waiting for it to happen at the same time, but sometimes people say maybe if Turkey went ahead, Azerbaijan is going to follow suit, and then people will say, well, Turkey is not going to do it until Azerbaijan signs it. So, what is the sequence of the normalization, and what is it once it's normalized? What does it mean for both the people of Turkey and Armenia? And Ms. Karapetyan, the question for you, I think, is the broadest. Once the peace deal is signed, we're going to assume it's not a question of if, but when it's signed, what's the day after look like? What's the situation with borders? Are people, and I understand people will not start traveling between Armenia and Azerbaijan freely the next day, but how do we build up to a situation where hopefully people can travel between these two countries when there is cultural exchange and, well, cultural and economic exchange probably is going to be, trade is probably going to be the initial way of interaction. What does the day after or month after or a year after, once the peace deal is signed, what does it look like for Armenia? So maybe, Jennifer, if you want to take that question and we'll just go in that order.
Great, thank you, Baki. It's a very good question. People like to, certainly the media or others like to assume that it's easy, right? If you see two places at war with one another and one tends to have one religion and one tends to have another, that therefore it must be a religious war. I do not think that this has ever or is now about Christians versus Muslims. If you go back historically, a colleague and I are currently going through reams of maps we found next door at the Library of Congress. If you look back through the centuries, you have consistently had Azerbaijanis and Armenians living in the same tract of land. Yes, you have a greater percentage of Armenians, and you tend to have them more over the population, and Azerbaijanis tend to be in more certain local pockets. But you have consistently had two populations living in the same area. When you have differences amongst the groups. If you go back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, when you had the first oil boom taking place in the area, you had certain populations, Armenian, Russian, Azerbaijani, that held different classes of jobs. There you had tension. Again, it had nothing to do with religion, though. So I think where you start to see the reification of tensions is really with the Soviet period, where you have a reification of national identity. But I don't think it would be accurate to say that it's a Christian versus Muslim war.
Thank you so much.
Turkish-Armenian border has been closed for decades, and now both Turkish and Armenian governments recognize that this border opening will be a win-win. President Erdogan loves this phrase, win-win. But unfortunately, there is a hurdle. President Aliyev of Azerbaijan doesn't want this border to be opened. And he is in touch with President Erdogan always. Whenever Turkey wants to open this border, President Aliyev of Azerbaijan announces new investment plans with Sokar, Azerbaijan's oil company, and buys Erdogan's silence. When Mr. President Erdogan, in the last 4 years, I witnessed it 4 times, really wanted this border to open. And he sent messages to the Biden administration, but he didn't see any credit. Now, President Erdogan is a transactional guy. Of course, he's benefiting from Azerbaijan with some billions of dollars. But he says, I'm just benefiting from Baku. I'm not getting any credit from Europe or United States, so why should I open this border? He sees this border opening as a bargaining chip. And this is going to be a real win-win because Turkey's eastern part is so much underdeveloped. And Armenia has a huge potential. And this is going to be a lifeline for Armenia. And Armenian government recognizes that this is going to be a breakthrough for Armenia because Armenia is so much dependent on Russia. When it comes to grain, it is 97%. When it comes to energy, it is 70, 80%. So Armenia wants to diversify its economy, and this is going to be a real breakthrough. But for this, US and the EU needs to recognize President Erdogan. If Turkey-Armenia border opens, I guess it's going to be easier for President Aliyev to sign the peace deal.
Excellent. Thank you. Dr. Kaplan?
Thank you, Bakhti. Armenia's situation remains immensely complicated with respect to Iran, because we have to understand the fact that Armenia is in a state of blockade surrounded by predatory neighbors. And so it's a question of basically within a domain of an existential threat to its economic survival and also to its capacity for regional functionality. Armenia's approach has been to the recent conflict, one of strategic ambiguity, because the intent has been not to immerse itself into an extraordinarily complex situation, but at the same time play a very constructive role in basically mitigating the fallout. To answer your question, indeed, Armenia is the only country in the South Caucasus that has exceptional relations with the United States and very good relations with Iran. And in that context, it does have the initial foundational basis to serve as a moderating platform. But the extent to which the two sides want to do that, and whether we could bring the negotiating platform from Qatar to the South Caucasus, Armenia would be the most opportune base. But when you have a region that is defined by persistent insecurity, an actor that is threatened by both sides, blockaded by both sides, has big chunks of its territory occupied, that in of itself makes it extremely vulnerable as a state. And so within that vulnerability, it basically diminishes a capacity to serve as a bridge for negotiations. But once those issues are addressed, Armenia becomes probably the only state in the Eurasian space that could actually mitigate the conflict between Iran and the West whenever it rises up.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Ms. Garpetian?
Thank you. To remind the question, you asked me what the next day might be like.
What does it look like? The peace deal is signed because we're working toward. Everyone is working toward it, and I think we have to acknowledge everyone who's doing it. But it's signed. Okay, everybody sigh of relief, but what does it look like in practice? I mean, between Azerbaijan and Armenia, are there going to be? Are there going to be parliamentary exchanges? Are people going to be visiting each other? Is there some sort of a trade that can, naturally probably will bubble up? What does it look like? Again, when I say next day, it doesn't have to be the next day, but maybe immediately after.
Oh, I like your explorative optimism. I really want us to appreciate this moment, but
that's what my wife says too.
Let me take us for a moment to the importance of having a text that both Armenia and Azerbaijan said we are happy or comfortable or we can accept everything that's addressed in this document, and this is signable. So we agree that this perhaps doesn't address every single issue that has ever taken place back in history or that we might have sometime in the future, but this is the basics, and we've agreed to include this and nothing more. It is comfortable for both of us to sign this document. This is indeed historic. Yes. And we really need to put a lot of effort into achieving the moment when we will sign this document. And while being realistic means that we should not expect that the next day people will be able to travel to each other, this is the ultimate aim towards which we're working, because the title of this peace agreement is Agreement on Peace and Establishment of Interstate Relations. So we're talking about a full normalization in the future for us, and Armenia is resolute to move in this direction. The peace treaty not only has basic things that we all know of, mutual recognition of territorial integrity is already there, and that will put an end to any sort of speculation in the future. Or speculations today. But it also has articles which don't get to be talked often. Also because they are very positive articles, such as that the two countries will collaborate on a range of issues, economic, cultural. So this peace treaty is closing the page of conflict, but it is also opening opportunities for both of our countries. So we do have a lot to do on the next day to make the future that our peoples have been dreaming about a possibility. So yes, there will be a day when there will be parliamentary exchanges. There will be a day when people will be able to peacefully cross the border, which we are also working on delimiting and demarcating now. There will be a deblocking of communications to make all of this possible for a peaceful, prosperous future of the South Caucasus. And that's our aim. That's what we will be working towards.
Thank you for giving such a thoughtful answer to my very unthoughtful question. But I genuinely appreciate it. I think that's right. The signing is the important part. Just as a quick follow-up, and then if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. Some of the critics, some of the folks that we've met with here in the United States have said, what's the point of signing a peace deal with Azerbaijan when we know, and that's what they say, that they're not gonna honor it. So many times they would sign something and they would not honor it. And yet you're talking about the importance of literally agreeing on of certain conditions and signing that paper. What would be your response to people who say that agreement is not gonna be worth the paper that it's signed on?
Your first question was very thoughtful. Your second question is very thoughtful. I'm an elected official. My people elected me to deliver a better future for my people. So while we're exiting this era of conflict, which gives a lot of ground for us to entertain mistrust and try to be on this verge of being realistic and suspicious of the future, my task is very clear. I was elected to work for a better future, so that is where I'm going to direct my energies towards. And it's also very important that Armenia and Azerbaijan and the officials representing these two countries do put forward effort to be persuasive for each other, first and foremost. And we will do our job in this direction. And we know that over time, we will be able to achieve our goals. We believe in what we're talking about. We believe the path that we have taken together with our people, and we will achieve. There will be peace. There won't be war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, like the Prime Minister has said. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're probably going to make it, cut it out, clip it out, and just post it, because people think that sometimes we're too optimistic. But I 100% agree, and I know that our commissioners agree in the sentiment. I would like to open it up to anyone in the audience. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask our distinguished panelists, witnesses on that. Anyway, because I can continue with my questions forever, unfortunately, for all of you. And good thing that AC is working well, because it was not before. Can I ask you a question about, I think in the news, one of the biggest things, well, last week was Prime Minister Pashinyan visit to Turkey. I mean, when we say historic, I know it's an overused word, but it truly was. What's your, I obviously saw some of your thinking, your tweets about what you thought, but for the members of the audience, could you share some of your thoughts about the visit, the importance, and sort of takeaways?
Of course, it is historic, and President Erdogan and Prime Minister Pashinyan met in Istanbul, and really, this is the maybe first official meeting between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Of course, there were some meetings, but those were not official at all. And Armenia and Azerbaijan doesn't have formal diplomatic ties, but informally, Armenia and Azerbaijan established diplomatic ties. This is very important on every level. Yeah. President to Prime Minister, foreign ministers, national security advisor, everybody is in touch. This is very important. There is a de facto, the diplomatic ties are de facto established. I guess last week's visit was really very important breakthrough for this.
Are there any, trying to read the tea leaves, because obviously there's nothing sort of concrete, but trying to read the tea leaves, what's your takeaway? is there any positive follow-up to this that you think is going to happen, or is it just sort of that exploratory stage and it is what it is, and we just should take it at face value?
Yeah, it's unfortunately no. We didn't hear any positive steps. Why? Because a day before that visit, President Aliyev was in Turkey as well, and he met with President Erdogan. And President Erdogan is always really asking President Aliyev to move forward. But President Aliyev doesn't want President Erdogan to move forward because President Aliyev prefers an isolated Armenia. Because he believes if Turkey moves forward and opens the border, Armenian economy will boost, Armenia will be prosperous, and in 3 to 5 years or in 10 years, Armenia will be stronger than Azerbaijan. This is where US diplomacy needs to step in to make sure that with opening the borders, now, Azerbaijan also will benefit. Armenia, Turkey, and Azerbaijan will benefit. All these countries will benefit because he believes, Azerbaijan is a petrostate, and Armenia has several sectors, IT sector and other sectors, and isolated Armenia will be weaker than Azerbaijan forever, and it is going to be under the pressure of Russia, which is, these days we are hearing so many things about Russian influence in Armenia. So this is where US diplomacy needs to step in to really engage with President Erdogan. This is the right time to open the border and ask President Erdogan to put his influence over President Aliyev to sign this peace deal.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Jennifer, if I may ask you this question, we've been talking about the benefits for the United States. We've been talking about the benefits generally for the region and Armenia. What's in this peace deal for Azerbaijan? I mean, except that, okay, peace is a good thing, but what else is there for Azerbaijan? What's the motive? What are some of the things that we could use to nudge Azerbaijan towards getting this deal done?
It's a really good question, and I want to circle back to Maria's comments, which I thought were really good, talking about, from the Armenian perspective, wanting to achieve a peace deal. I think there's that same feeling on the Azerbaijani side, and I think it's important. 2 points I would make. One, if you look at peace deals in general, it's not usually a one and done, right? I mean, look at the Good Friday Agreement. How many iterations, you have negotiated, where you can sometimes have to go back to ceasefire, then you get to a full, and then you sometimes have to go back. So I think one thing, it would be important for people to assume this isn't going to be everything is accomplished by this. It's going to be an important, interstate dialogue is going to be established. But then we have to look at the fuller picture, right? It's not just about the two governments. It's actually about the people on the ground. And again, I would recommend going back to 98 and looking at the Good Friday Agreement. Like, it was one thing, and it was a phenomenal agreement, right? But it took time then to get actually on the ground. And so this, I think it is a good step to get the interstate agreement established, but then you have to establish trust by people on the ground. And so what's in it for Azerbaijan? I think it's the people, right? And I would circle back to, for 30 years, you had, 600,000 plus Azerbaijani IDPs in the country. People are very well aware of what that's like. And I do actually think there is sympathy now for Armenians that have been displaced to Armenia, right? No one wants to be a refugee or an IDP. And so for the people on the ground, there is an objective, but you first have to have that scaffolding, which is the structure of the interstate relations. Then you've got to establish mechanisms for people to come back together. And that can't all be done in one document, and that's not going to be done in 1 week. But I do think on the ground, people on both sides really do want to be able to come together. And I circle back to these maps. You have historically had these two populations living in the same area. It's unfortunate circumstances of geopolitical circumstances of the 20th century that drove this wedge between.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Dr. Kapanen, if I can ask you this question, because you focus on regional dynamics and regional security, we've kind of talked about it, and I think a little bit in passing, but we talked about Georgia, and I think you didn't mention it by name, but so the decline in certain countries in a region. I think we all know which country we're talking about here. But what, aside from domestic developments in Georgia right now, does Georgia has a role to play in this process? What is their position, and how do they benefit from this, or what exactly is their position on this has been?
Thank you for the question. Georgia's approach traditionally has been to be ageopolitical, if you will, because they much rather deal with domestic developments and then until the recent backsliding found themselves within sort of the security architecture or adjacent architecture of the West. And with the exception of the complexities that they had with Russia, with South Ossetia and Abkhazia, Georgia does not have any geopolitical regional security threats. And in that context, they have refrained from direct engagement because they do seek to have a balanced approach towards both neighbors. It's also a question of capacity, right? Georgia does not have the capacity to be a mitigating actor to solving these complex issues. I mean, considering the fact that the United States, until to this point, is applying so much resources and we haven't signed anything, the ability of a small state like Georgia to address these kinds of issues becomes rather limited. Conceptually, Georgia-Armenia relations, Georgia-Azerbaijan relations, they remain on pure bilateral grounds because you have regional fracture. And one of the important outcomes of a potential peace treaty would be more interconnectivity and regional integration. And the problem with this, of course, is that when you have a growing authoritarianism in Azerbaijan, interconnectivity becomes a problem because authoritarian regimes do not have open systems. Right? Until to this day, their borders are closed, for example. And so when regimes, when entire people, so the Azerbaijani people clearly want peace. I fundamentally agree. But these people are also held hostage to the whims of a dictator. So in that context, what the Azerbaijani people seek, but what the behavior of the Azerbaijani government dictates are two different things. And so when you have an obstructive force in the region that basically obstructs interconnectivity, small states like Georgia must stick to bilateral engagements as opposed to multilateral regional interconnectivity. And so this remains one of the complexities why Georgia's capacity would be limited in addressing the conflict between the two. And even since 1994, Georgia's role has been one of, they played a marginally supportive role, but substantively they're not a regional actor to address issues of deep conflict and conflict persistence.
Thank you so much. And just a question to the group, and anyone who's wanting to talk on it can take it, just because we all, again, sort of touched upon it a little bit. But the elephant, well, I guess the bear that isn't not talking about is, or we haven't really explicitly talked about, is Russia, right? Fully understanding that there's a diminished role for, just objectively, Russia is currently playing in a region because it's, for a lot of reasons, we're not going to get into it, but is Russia interested in a peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan? Because, we keep talking about we're talking about the actors, but is Russia interested in this? And what is their role? What are they doing? Or are they just ambivalent, or are they just sitting on the sidelines, or they're somehow actually being a, not a good actor? So, Narcissus, if you want to take that, and then anyone else who wants to touch on that.
No, Russia absolutely is not interested in a peace deal, and that's for their own strategic reasons. The way Russia basically exercises authority in what it perceives to be its spheres of influence is to basically engage in what we call authoritarian conflict management. And so if you have conflict within two parties, at best Russia would basically freeze the conflict, thus you have a frozen conflict, but it would manage that frozen conflict and then thaw it to achieve its geostrategic or geo-regional objectives. And so if you have peace in a region, Russia's levers as a hegemonic actor diminish. And the fact that its levers are diminished, it no longer becomes a dominant actor. So peace in the region is not conducive to Russian interests. They've been at this since 1994. A lot of times they do play an obstructive role in the process. So, there's a lot of work on the literature about, good peace, bad peace, right? Illiberal peace building or liberal peace building. Russia's model simply doesn't work. We saw this in Abkhazia, in South Ossetia. We saw this with Nagorno-Karabakh, right? And we saw this in Crimea in 2014. Russia prefers frozen conflicts that it could manage and utilize or weaponize to advance its strategic interests. So in that context, relying on Russia as a regional actor to secure peace is simply not commensurate with Russia's behavior or their foreign policy thinking.
Armenian people believe that there is always a threat, there can only be a coming threat from Turkey and that is why they have to, depend on Russia about security. But lately, the good news is, Armenia and Turkey just showed this, that they are not threat to each other. And Turkey wants to establish good relations. And so this is why, and another reason is Armenia really believed, Armenian people believed, Russia will come to their help whenever it is needed. Okay, it was maybe understandable for Nagorno-Karabakh. No, it was perceived as a betrayal from Russia, Nagorno-Karabakh loss. But what about in 2022? Armenia, Azerbaijan, invaded a chunk of Armenian land, and Russia did not come to Armenian help. That is where Armenian people understood that Russia will not come, is not coming and will not come to their help. This is why Armenian people now is seeking a strategic autonomy. They don't want to rely on Russia. They don't want to rely on any power. And I agree with this. Armenia should not rely on USA, France, or Russia. Armenia should rely on its power and its friendship with its neighbors. And that is why what Armenian government is trying to establish, to empower its capacity and establish good relations with its neighbors.
Yeah. Jennifer, you want to?
No, I don't have anything to add beyond I agree with my colleagues. And I would just say, actually, building on Garo's point, I think it's just more of an impetus why there should be a peace deal that's achieved, right? That the three countries, and I would add in Georgia there, they would be much stronger if they were collectively working together because they are in a difficult neighborhood.
I think all points to, again, I know we've been talking about this being a historic moment. Truly, it seems like all the stars have aligned for this deal to get done, whether it's from the threats from the east or opportunities, truly genuine opportunities for trade and economy and prosperity and regional security. It seems like now is the time to do it. So that was the purpose of this briefing today, is explore that and really understand what can we do to get it done. And I think the incentive is really, really strong. And I think all we need is a little bit of more engagement, a little bit more interest. And I think it's one of those, again, I hate to use a cliche, but it's one of the low-hanging fruits in the world, it seems like, right? So the United States government should engage on this more. Before we wrap this up, anyone in the audience would like to ask a question?
Hi, my name is Elizabeth, and I have a question for the witnesses. How can Armenia be expected to sign a peace deal with Azerbaijan while Azerbaijan, fuels Armenophobia, holds hostages in Baku, and occupies Armenian land and continues ceasefire violations, including firing on civilians in Siunik just a few days ago?
Thank you for your question. Who would like to?
That's a very good question. The understanding is that the objective of the peace treaty is basically going to address those issues. And so Armenia cannot, for example, it would be self-negating to say we are not going to sign a peace treaty even though we seek peace. And so the terms of the agreements are specifically designed to address all of the legitimate points that are being brought forth. And so if you have a peace treaty, then the shootings will stop, right? The occupation of our Armenian territory cannot be sustainable, because if the peace treaty recognizes the borders of both countries, you can't be occupying Armenian territories, so on and so forth. And so I think looking at this sort of in an inverse way, the peace treaty is designed to address all the concerns that are being put forth. If we say we're not going to sign the peace treaty until these issues are addressed, that we are simply falling into Aliyev's trap, who is looking to find artificial obstacles to delay the process. So in that context, Armenia has been constructive and genuine in its approach. We sign a peace treaty, and all these specific concerns will be addressed by virtue of that agreement. Whether Aliyev reneges on that, that's a different subject of conversation. But generally speaking, and Maria noted this, if Ali was going to renege on the peace treaty, he would have signed it and reneged on it already. And so he understands the immense the diplomatic capital he's going to lose, and and for someone like him, international prestige is very important. So there are a lot of nuances that go into it. But to answer your question, Armenia's state of insecurity and the examples you gave are very strong characteristics of this insecurity can only be addressed through a peace treaty. Now, once a peace treaty is signed, then those specific issues can be addressed in due time.
Can I step in? Yes, please. I agree, Dr. Kopolian, but I want to add one thing. If we have a signed peace deal, this peace deal might have 60% of a chance, 70 or 80, for some of the people, 30% of a chance. But it has a chance. I believe it has an 80, 90% of a chance, but some people might be biased. But if we don't have a peace deal, possibility is maybe 70%, 80% or 90% in the coming years. Look, now Israel and Iran couldn't solve their problems, and at the end they fall into a war. And Russia, Ukraine, same thing works for that as well. And President Aliyev has demands, and he wants to get them, with a war maybe in the coming years. Because he's always keeping that door open. So, as Armenians in the world and Armenian people knows that Azerbaijan has the upper hand now. So peace is in favor of Armenia, first of all. And that is why Mr. President Aliyev is dragging his feet. Same thing works for the political prisoners as well. Without a peace deal, we have 0% of a chance to get those political prisoners. I know that type. Dictators are like this. They take hostages. But with a peace, we have 50%, 60% or 70% of a chance that we can get those political prisoners back. Which one should we prefer? I prefer the prospect of a peace to get our political prisoners back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sir.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Richard. First, I start with a question. How can you have peace without justice? And let me put down some markers. Armenia is one of the oldest nations in the world, like fifth on the list that I've seen. Azerbaijan was created by Joseph Stalin. It's just barely 100 years old. So let's keep those facts in front of us. So how can you have peace without justice? So when the people of Artsakh, and they lived there for, let's say, 3,000 years, governing themselves for 3,000 years. When you're blockaded for nearly 10 months, Luis Moreno Ocampo referred to it as a genocidal blockade, where food, medicine, energy, and other vital goods were not allowed into your nation. That was followed by a military assault, unprovoked military assault, where your people fled to Armenia because they knew if they stayed in Azerbaijan control, their lives would be probably lost. There was a rumor and some factual evidence from satellite imagery of a concentration camp being built. So we have all of those things in mind of a blockade, referred to as genocidal blockade, war crimes committed, a charge against Azerbaijan. Armenia has levied charges before the International Criminal Court and is now willing to withhold those charges in the name of peace. So how can you have peace without justice? What we are saying to the world, to other dictators, if you do these things too, you will also face no repercussions. A blockade, an attack, ethnic cleansing, genocide, all of those things happen and still no accountability towards Azerbaijan. So how can you have peace? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's a tough question, and Garo, I think anyone else, please.
No, I have been living in Turkey for half a century, and I always heard this line, peace without justice. Turkey has to recognize the Armenian genocide first, then we can have a justice. But it never happened. My grandfather died without justice. My father died without justice. And if these things goes like this, I will die without the justice. I don't want to leave this to my children. No. We have to end this cycle of retribution first. Every peace doesn't guarantee 100% justice. But some pieces stop cycle of retribution. Then you establish mechanisms for reconciliation. That is how things work. I walked through this. Turkey was in a democratic path, and we could recognize the Armenian genocide. Turkish people were not ready to call it a genocide, but they understood that something bad has happened. So we have, and I believe only a democratic Turkey can recognize the Armenian genocide. For this, we need to end this cycle of retribution first. Then we have to establish mechanisms for reconciliation. It is going to take maybe years, but we will struggle for justice more and more. But we have to first stop this retribution cycle.
The question in of itself is a very legitimate question, but it is a question that is basically stipulated in an abstract framework, and then you have the reality. The reality is that Armenia finds itself at a severe power disparity, and Azerbaijan uses that asymmetry in a very coercive fashion. And so if you maintain an unpeace posture and demanding justice, where the international community has failed, right, to impose those terms of justice, a country that does not have the capacity to impose justice on an aggressive actor basically becomes a discussion in tautology. We're going into circular logic, right? So in that context, Armenia has concrete physical security issues that need to be addressed. So peace is viewed through the lens of providing stability, normalizing relations, right? Addressing the security dilemma. And after that, as Scholar noted, we could then start talking about elements of justice. But if the position is going to be we are not going to go down the path of peace because we demand justice, one could demand it all at once. But what are the mechanisms of achieving it? Because the international community is not giving it to you. You spoke of the blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh, of Artsakh, very legitimate example. The United Nations Security Council was not even able to pass a resolution condemning that. And so if there are no international mechanisms to bring peace, to bring justice, and so Armenia's preferred option is to establish peace, right, to address the power asymmetry, to bring stability and functionality to the region, that is going to be the concrete step of action. And then assessments of peace, whether it's at the abstract level, at the legal level, those have to come later, right? But in the position and the way things exist, we cannot pose abstract questions when we have concrete problems on the ground that still need to be resolved.
Yeah, just add in one comment. I appreciate the gentleman's comments because I think they underscore the immense pain that is among the populace. And again, to go back to the fact that we have to get to a peace agreement among two states, and then we have to deal with how the populations feel, and there's equal pain on both sides. You have historically had two populations living in this area. Prior to the past 100 years, you did not have the atrocities that we've seen, certainly not the atrocities that you've seen in the last 30 years, but we're looking at 650,000 internally displaced people in Azerbaijan. You have upwards of 115 to 130,000 refugees in Armenia. Add in Georgia, which we've talked briefly about. In the South Caucasus collectively, you have over 1 million people that are internally displaced. You have a lack of transportation, communication, all these others. I think we need to get back to what people have been underscoring. You need a peace deal at the state level, and then you can start to work on this enormous trauma that is among all these populations. And it's felt across the board.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your incredible answers. And I think we are right at the time when we're supposed to finish. We went, I think, over a few minutes, but I just would like to thank our incredible panel. I knew they would do a great job, but they just exceeded my expectations. You did a fantastic job, so thank you so much. Thank you so much to our audience for staying with us through this complex conversation. I think the one takeaway is now's the time to act, now's the time to get it done. So that's what we're gonna work toward with you, with our colleagues in Armenia, with our colleagues in Azerbaijan, and hopefully we're gonna be able to get it done. So thank you so much. Thank you.